for the opener, the NFL wants to celebrate the beginning of the season. They want a big matchup.
This is going to put a big old fat number on the board.
They're competing for the division. It's going to be because of Bijan Robinson, not because of the guy backing him up.
Hey, New Orleans, better luck in 2026. Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast. I am your host, Dave Helman. We got a great show for y'all today. Ralph Vacchiano of foxsports.com dropped by talking biggest needs remaining on NFL rosters. Free agency is ancient history. The NFL draft just took place. Rookies are at mini camp right now. We're getting the offseason program going, but most teams, in fact, I would even say all teams, still have at least one problem spot on their roster, some much bigger than others. Ralph stopped by to talk about some of the most high-profile ones, some of the ones that really feel like they need to be addressed between now and the start of the season. Really fun conversation. Also, plenty of current events to get into. Maybe you've heard it's NFL schedule release week. The full thing drops on Wednesday night, as it often does. And we will have a recap for you on Thursday, going over all the ins and outs of it, all the behind the scenes stuff, the making of the schedule. But as has so often been the case recently, it's already starting to trickle out. You're seeing some of the big primetime matchups get announced early. And on Monday morning, we found out what our opener would be, the Thursday night banner-raising game, the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, we've known since the Super Bowl that they would be hosting that game. Now we know who they play. Hint, hint, major ratings. Hint, hint, NFC East grudge match. Of course, the NFL picked the Dallas Cowboys to travel up to Philly for that game. Had a chance to talk to Ralph about that. And oh, by the way, one of the longest tenured quarterbacks in the NFL retired over the weekend. Tells you how much is going on when Derek Carr retiring is third billing at the top of the show. So without further ado, let's get into it. Really fun conversation with Ralph. Let's go. All right, Ralph, thanks for hopping on, man. And before we dive in, look, I think the individual rollout of games for the NFL schedule can be a little bit much sometimes, but it is noteworthy when the first game of the season gets announced, and it's right in our wheelhouse. Longtime NFC East ties for you. Obviously, I covered the Dallas Cowboys for a long time. So to find out that we get a Cowboys-Eagles game on the Thursday night to open the season, Eagles will raise their banner in front of Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. I think there are some other options they had, and I know the Cowboys weren't great last year, but the intrigue here is too good to pass up, I think. This is going to be a spectacle to open the 2025 season.
Yeah, and that's what they're going for. First of all, you're right. Only the NFL could drag out the schedule announcement over multiple days when we already know the opponents. We're just giving you dates and times, which, by the way, could be changed later in the season. But yeah, I mean, there were probably other options that the Eagles had that could have, maybe a mid-season matchup against an out-of-division team that this could have given some juice to, but for the opener, the NFL wants to celebrate the beginning of the season. They want a big matchup. And whatever you think of the Cowboys, they're still America's team. There's a lot of eyes that are still on them. A lot of people pay attention, and they think they're going to be able to challenge the Eagles. So this is their statement game in a way. And for the Eagles, the home team, if the champs have the home opener, they've had a lot of luck over the years winning that game. And they know that with the crowd fired up and all the excitement of the opener, they'll be happy to bring the Cowboys in and try to teach them a lesson and show them that they're still the champs until someone knocks them off. So there's a lot of storylines, a lot of attention, and that's what the league wants for this game.
It is funny. There's no hard rules for this, right? But it is normal and common to see the league schedule this game between the reigning champion and a playoff team. You see a lot of conference title game rematches. At least once or twice we've had a Super Bowl rematch. Sometimes they'll schedule an up and coming team that's getting a lot more attention than it's used to. The Cowboys are just always going to draw, and I couldn't help but notice one of the last times the league picked a team that had a losing record the year before was also the Cowboys all the way back in 2012 when they opened the season against the Eli Manning Giants. I get it if people are tired of the visibility that the Cowboys bring with them, but the ratings are what they are, and this is going to put a big old fat number on the board, which is ultimately the NFL's goal. On top of that, I'll be honest, I didn't even realize this until I started looking into it, but we haven't gotten as many Jalen Hurts versus Dak Prescott matchups as you would probably think. Dak was injured last year for both of these games. Jalen sat out of the big 2022 game a couple years ago that happened around Christmas. This feels like a way to guarantee that you get to see those two quarterbacks play each other because it hasn't been the case here over the last few years.
Yeah, and that'll add to the juice of the game as well. It's just a big matchup. There are stars on both sides of the ball, both teams. Huge names in the NFL. So, like them or not, a lot of people are going to be watching. And the Cowboys, yeah, they were a losing team last year, but I don't think the NFL looks at them as a losing team. They look at them as a team that lost because their quarterback was missing for a good chunk of the season. You put Dak Prescott back, and they probably were a winning team last year. At least they would like to think so. So it's a high-profile matchup between two teams that they believe are going to be really strong. We'll see if that's going to be the case. I know we're pretty convinced that that's going to be the case with the Eagles. We'll see with the Cowboys. But, again, no matter what you think of these teams, these players, these quarterbacks, you're going to watch. And it's what the NFL wants. They didn't want Eagles against some nobody on opening weekend. They wanted a high-profile matchup, and it just doesn't get bigger than this.
The other big news item I wanted to hit on with you happened over the weekend on Saturday morning, I believe. Derek Carr announced he is retiring, which actually this ties perfectly into our topic for the day because we're going to talk about remaining needs for teams around the NFL, things that they still might want to address. And yes, the Saints did draft Tyler Shough out of Louisville with the 40th overall pick in the draft, but this just throws it into a greater spotlight that quarterback looking like a real iffy situation in New Orleans. You're basically choosing between Shough, who is a rookie, and Spencer Rattler, who did get a chance to play some because of Carr's injuries last year. But Saints look like they're heading into the season with easily the least amount of experience in the NFL at the quarterback position. Even if they don't, I don't think it makes a ton of sense for Aaron Rodgers to go to New Orleans. I don't even know if he would field that phone call, but it does make you wonder if the Saints try to pursue some experience somewhere, because you're talking about a second-year guy in Rattler who's appeared in 5 games, I think, and then obviously Shough. It just doesn't feel like enough experience to go through an NFL season to me.
Right. I mean, if you go and find experience at this stage, you're looking at a guy like Carson Wentz, somebody who's, going to start for a couple of games, and it's just there as a placeholder and accepts that that's his job. And I think that the Saints, Kellen Moore, Tyler Shough is his guy. Clearly, he's the new coach. They went out and drafted him in the second round. He's the guy who's got the leg up on Spencer Rattler. I'm sure that Kellen Moore wants to develop him. He wants to get him ready as soon as possible. That's not a situation that Aaron Rodgers wants to be in. Aaron Rodgers would want to be the guy and see how far he can take it, which is why the Steelers make so much sense. There's not really a guy sitting behind him on that roster. But there would be on the Saints. And this is going to be Tyler Shough's team at some point. I don't think they thought it would be this quickly. I know they knew about Derek Carr's injury. Obviously, they knew it was serious. I think they were holding out hope that he could still be there for at least part of the season. Instead, they have what could be the worst quarterback situation in the league right now, depending on what happens in Pittsburgh. And if they're wrong on Tyler Shough, then it's really the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. But if they're right about him, they're going to find out pretty early whether they're right about him or not, because he's got to be the favorite right now to be the starter for that team.
My apologies to Jake Haener, also worth mentioning him. He was drafted in the 4th round a couple years ago, but he's made one NFL start. He's thrown 39 NFL passes. The point remains the same. When you're just talking about whether or not guys have done it at the NFL level, there's not a lot to fall back on in that New Orleans quarterback room. I would say the silver lining there is nobody on the current Saints roster wants to hear this, but you could set yourself up really well for 2026. If this season goes poorly, you will be in prime position to draft a quarterback next year. I don't think we need to get into who that might be. I know the parallel of Arch Manning potentially being available the year that the Saints might have a top pick. That is a dream scenario for those of us that make content, but it's too far out to predict. But my thing with that, Ralph, is since the Drew Brees era really kicked into high gear, and in the years since he left, Mickey Loomis, the general manager in New Orleans, has refused to admit that the Saints are not a competitive team. I mean, people wanted them to reboot this thing the year that they signed Derek Carr. And everybody was like, is this really what you want to do? Like, do you want to take on more money for a veteran quarterback who probably won't get you over the hump? And everything they've done since, I mean, even this year with all the uncertainty around Carr, they spent big money on Justin Reed, the safety from Kansas City. Like, they are always making moves that a team who thinks it's in contention would make, even if that doesn't really seem to be the case. So I'm curious to see how the Saints handle this, because all of the evidence says, hey, New Orleans, better luck in 2026, guys. But that's just not how they've operated in the last decade or so.
No, it's not. They've been fooling themselves for a long time, thinking that they are more than what they actually are. At this point, once you lose quarterback Derek Carr, you'd think they would just blow it all up and start over, see if they could get something for Alvin Kamara and, really kind of reset their salary cap and ride out the season on Tyler Shuck. And, hey, if you struck gold, great. You've got your quarterback for 2026. If not, like you said, you're in prime position to get whoever that top pick is. I think they think highly of Tyler Shook. I think that there was certainly, some thought going into this draft, because nobody was high on these quarterbacks, as we've discussed many times, that maybe for some teams it was you're better off not drafting one and waiting until 2026 and then going for whoever's in the first round. There could be 5 or 6 first rounders that year if things work out the way everybody expects. But I like the fact that they got a young quarterback. They didn't draft him in the first round, so they're not heavily invested in him. They take a chance and see if he's got anything, and maybe he could be the guy. But, I think hopefully Kellen Moore understands that what he got here is not a playoff team. It's not a team that's going to make a run. It's a team that's going to develop. This whole season should be about seeing whether they can develop that quarterback. And if they decide at some point that they can't, he's just not the guy, figuring out how to move on. Nothing else is going to matter, because this is not a team that's going to win 7, 8, 9 games and even be on the fringe of the playoff race.
I hope the Saints can learn that lesson. I mean, I just said that I think it's surprising they don't have more experience. And yeah, if you want to go get a Carson Wentz or somebody that can be the adult in the room for 3 quarterbacks that have just not played a lot of NFL football, I think that's a good idea. But yes, you should be trying as hard as you can to figure out if Tyler Shook is worth being excited about beyond this season, and tooling this thing up for 2026. I got to see the Saints do it to believe it, though, because I feel that way about the Saints every other year, and they do not agree with me. So I'm interested to see if Mickey Loomis is finally willing to call this what it is in New Orleans, at least for 2025. But it's a great segue for what we wanted to talk about here, which you wrote a great story for foxsports.com right after the draft, essentially addressing the biggest need left for every team in the league. And the fun part about this is some of it's already been addressed. In the time since you wrote the story, George Pickens is a Dallas Cowboy now. So we know the Cowboys dealt with their need at receiver, but there's still some really big ones that are still out there that I wanted to talk to you about. Not going to go through the entire league, but at least a few really important ones. And looking this over, I think a phenomenal place to start is the Detroit Lions and what people perceived at the time as maybe a lack of movement at the edge rusher position. Because even with Aiden Hutchinson returning from injury, it's fair to wonder if that is as well stocked as it should be for a Super Bowl caliber team.
Right. It's absolutely not. They've had a lot of injury issues along the front line and didn't generate nearly the kind of pass rush they were expecting. And they obviously their one stud was Aiden Hutchinson, and he'll be back. They hope. They hope he's the same as he was. They can't possibly be sure of that, but they don't really have a number two guy that can help him and get the pressure off of him. And it's surprising to me that they didn't address that more in the offseason, really all in the offseason. I thought for sure first round pick was going to be an edge rusher. It just seemed like such a glaring need. And now they're at a point where there isn't a lot they can do. A top edge rusher is not exactly sitting there waiting for everybody to decide how much they want to pay him. Their whole hope right now is in Aiden Hutchinson being what he once was. And it's a lot to hope for a guy coming off a pretty major injury.
It's interesting because, and a big theme for these types of stories is like, okay, well, at this point in the calendar, what do you even do? Star edge rushers are typically not sitting out there waiting to be signed deep into May and, deeper as you go into the summer. But there is a new interesting name to watch because the Carolina Panthers just released Jadeveon Clowney last week, like late last week. And I'm curious, I really feel like this is a situation where Clowney is going to be feeling out several potential suitors. Because no, he's not what he once was. But even in year 12, this is a guy that had 14 sacks over the last 2 years, and he's in a position to take the best deal possible from the best team possible. I'd like to think the Detroit Lions are one of those teams that's blowing him up right now.
You would think so. I mean, the only other options are, they decided not to bring back Zadarius Smith, and maybe they could change their mind on that. But once Clowney became available, he's like the ultimate mercenary pass rusher in the NFL. He just seems to bounce from team to team, lasting a year or so and then moving on. And that's fine. That's all that the Lions really need him for. And, 2 years ago, he had, I think, 9.5 sacks, 14, as you said, over the past couple of years. He still can bring it. He's not going to get you 20, but he's going to be that good number two guy to help Aiden Hutchinson out. And, again, at this time of the year, you're either hoping a young guy develops into something, which is a long shot, or you get a proven guy like him who's clearly near the end of his career, who's clearly going to want a little more money than you're going to be comfortable paying, but you're going to get a professional effort from him. You're going to get somebody who really can draw some attention away. So it seems like a perfect marriage. And for his perspective, I don't know what else he'd be looking for. A team at his age, you would think if you can get paid, obviously that's always big. But if you've got a team that legitimately can make a run at a Super Bowl, why wouldn't you want to join that?
This is one of my favorite archetypes in the NFL right now is the mercenary pass rusher. Like Clowney's pretty famous for it. Leonard Floyd has built up a reputation for doing this as well. I think you could throw in Dante Fowler Jr. as well. He caught on with Dallas, bounced over to Washington, bounced back to Dallas. I love the guy who's like, yeah, I'll sign for 1 year, get you 6 to 10 sacks, and then, take my talents elsewhere. And like I said, I mean, I think Detroit should be calling Clowney. Honestly, their division rivals, Green Bay, that's another team that I think is worth mentioning. I know they have needs in the secondary as well, but the Packers would probably love to have another edge rusher. If I was Jadeveon Clowney, first of all, I'm not trying to go to OTAs or minicamp at the age of 32. So I'm hanging out until like July. And I'm like, okay, Detroit, what are we talking about? What are the guarantees? Can I come be your number 2 edge rusher? I mean, it's just the best business model in the NFL right now.
And you're exactly right. There's not going to be resolution on this until late July because none of these veterans that are still out there want any part of minicamp or any of the offseason workout. They'll just show up when it's time to actually play. But you're right. He gets a small deal with a lot of incentives. See if maybe on a defense that could be good again, maybe that pushes him to earn some of those incentives. It seems to me like a great situation for him. As you mentioned, the Packers could be a great situation for him as well. He's in the driver's seat at the moment because edge rushers are hard to find if you don't have them, and everybody needs them.
I would be surprised if Detroit didn't find a way to address this because, like you said, we'll have to wait and see what Aiden Hutchinson looks like when he comes back from his injury. Marcus Davenport, their current number 2 edge rusher, he got hurt himself last year. He's only played 6 games over the last 2 years. It doesn't feel like they have enough, even with a healthy Hutchinson, to go through a full 17-game slate. So I've got a close eye on that. But I want to pick your brain about another one I don't think I line up in the same way as everybody else. There's been much made about the Buffalo Bills and their receiver situation. You wrote about it for foxsports.com. It's been in the news because general manager Brandon Beane got on the radio to defend himself. Basically, he was like, why is everybody coming after me for what I decide to do in the draft? Where do you fall on this? Because there is a lot of talk about how big of a need it is.
I get where he's coming from. I get what he's saying. Their success over the years has been terrific. And they had a lot of success last year with nobody who could come close to being a number one receiver. We saw that kind of success for years with the Kansas City Chiefs, where we're looking at them going, well, who's their number one receiver? They could do so much better if they had a better core. If you go back to the New England Patriots and their dynasty for years, they had underrated receivers that overproduced. But when I think about that, I also remember that the one year that Tom Brady got Randy Moss to play with him, those numbers really exploded. So I always think there's room for a number one receiver with a great quarterback, that true elite type of guy. And I think about what Josh Allen is now and what he really could be if he had a Jamar Chase, somebody like that to throw to. Now, you can't go and get those guys right now, but you still can upgrade the receiving core that you had and make him just a little better. And when you're competing for a Super Bowl and going against the Baltimore Ravens, the Kansas City Chiefs, that little edge might be everything. So if there's a receiver out there, and there might be one or two out there you can get, why wouldn't you want to upgrade that receiving core?
I don't want to say that the Bills don't need to do it, because I agree with you. And it's definitely like you're missing the alpha star receiver that you had when Stephon Diggs was really in his prime. And my heart skipped a beat when you talked about Josh Allen playing with Jamar Chase. I mean, that sounds like the most fun thing in the world, but I still look at what the Bills have done at receiver, and I hesitate to say it feels like enough, but I guess what I want to say is it doesn't feel fair to demand that much more from them when you look at it. I mean, Keon Coleman was their first pick in last year's draft. I'd like to believe you haven't given up on his development. You think he can give you more than what he did as a rookie, which wasn't bad, by the way. For a second round pick, you get almost 600 yards out of a rookie drafted in the second round. I'm calling that a win, even if it's not a home run. You drafted Dalton Kincaid in the first round the year before that. Khalil Shakir's good enough that they extended him this offseason. And they're always willing to go out and get veteran guys. Josh Palmer from the Chargers, he shouldn't get anybody excited. I'm sure he hasn't sold a ton of jerseys, but he's been a useful part of an NFL offense that has a star quarterback in Justin Herbert. He can give you 500-600 yards. Elijah Moore, who they just signed after the draft, has been averaging roughly 600 yards the last 2 years in Cleveland. I just feel like the totality of that is enough to where an MVP caliber quarterback like Josh Allen can pull it all together. Yes, you would like to have that superstar, but it's not as if they've ignored the position these last couple of years either.
Right. They have a lot of good guys and they've made it work with a lot of good guys. So I can't argue with Brandon Beane on that position. And, I think that if there was a Jamar Chase sitting out there, even a T Higgins, I would argue go get him if you can. Make that receiving core even better. The guy who can get 1,200 yards, plug him in for one of the guys who can get 600 yards. But I don't think those guys are available now. What I'd be arguing for now is some depth, some veteran depth. Though you've got your two guys, maybe a third guy, you're happy with that, but it's not the deepest receiving core. You have a bunch of 600-yard guys. You don't have a lot beneath them. So would a Keenan Allen hurt to add to the roster, a veteran who could also go get you 600 yards, maybe more than that? Yeah, great. He's old. I get it. So's Amari Cooper. Again, you're not going to find that alpha number one right now, but there are receivers who have a good track record who could add some depth and, maybe help out in some certain spots. So I would do it if I were Brandon Beane, but I get his argument. I get your argument. They've done pretty well with what they've had. And, I don't think it's not the thing that, is holding them back from being a Super Bowl team. I just look at them and I just wonder how much better could they be if they had that number one guy?
Could I interest you in a 5-year NFL veteran with almost 3,000 career yards and 29 career receiving touchdowns, who might know a thing or two about playing in Buffalo, because I laughed to myself today knowing we were going to talk about this when I realized that Gabe Davis is now in search of a job.
Right.
He spent 1 year outside of Buffalo, did not go well in Jacksonville. He dealt with injury down there. He was released recently. Maybe this is a situation where you say, hey, the bunny's not going to be as good as what you got from the Jags, but if you want to come back and make some heroic playoff catches, we're fine with that here. I don't know. Maybe we got a reunion on our hands.
And you've got some chemistry between him and the quarterback, and you could offer him a chance to be somewhat part of the offense and rejuvenate his career and reset his value for free agency after the season. It all seems perfect. You know, when you've got a receiver or anybody in that situation, they're looking for a place to prove themselves, and they're looking for a place to where they're comfortable with an offense they know, a quarterback they know, somebody they know, a coach that they know. All of that is up there in Buffalo. If you wanted to go back, that would make perfect sense.
I would like to see it. And if a known name gets cut at the end of training camp, so be it. I mean, maybe that would be Gabe Davis. It's not like you invested a ton in Elijah Moore last week when you signed him after the draft. I'd like to see that. Hey, we're going to keep 5 or 6 of y'all and may the best vets win. I still feel like it's enough. I mean, we haven't even talked about how loaded the Bills' backfield is either. Obviously, James Cook, Ray Davis was really nice for them as a rookie. I feel like there's enough here for right now. I will say, as Josh Allen gets older, he turns 29 at the end of this month. By the time he's 30, 31, I would like to see the Bills use a big time draft pick on a receiver. I don't really buy that it needs to be this year. I think there's enough there right now.
It's fair. And obviously, their general manager agrees with you. And I'm sure Josh Allen agrees with you, too. Again, the success has been there. It's, it's hard to argue against it when you've got a team that was as productive last year as they were, did as well as they did. I love those number one receivers. I think they're great in the clutch. It's kind of the immeasurable thing where you somebody to throw, he's going to be there. He's going to get open. He's going to make the tough catch. That guy's not there. Did that affect them last season at any point? I don't know that you could point to it and say that they did. Again, I just think that, that's a hole that if they had filled it, I'd feel much better about them than the way I do right now.
I mean, I'm sitting here making this case. I can't shake the memory of Dalton Kincaid, their former first round pick, not quite making the desperation play on fourth down in Kansas City. I'm not going to call that a drop. I think it's a difficult play to make, but you draft a tight end highly like that so he can make plays for you. I think that's the key to me. Keon Coleman needs to develop into a better second-year player, and it would be really great if Dalton Kincaid made a jump into being the star that they thought. Because to this point in his career, he hasn't been. But I think that's a difficult balance of being a general manager where you say, at what point do I trust that these guys haven't hit their ceiling? Or at what point do I pull the plug and bring another guy in here, even if it's going to cost him some development? Clearly, Brandon Beane seems to think that there's more for those guys to reach. At least I hope so. Because if he doesn't think that, then maybe he should have done something.
Oh, I'm sure he does. And general managers are always stubborn about all the time and scouting and investment they made and trying to make sure that the guys they got with the right pick, they believe in those guys and they want to see them develop. They know there's some untapped potential, at least from everything that they've seen from their reports and everything else. So I'm sure he's willing to wait. Who knows if there had been better tight ends and receivers on the open market, would that have changed anything? I don't know. But rather than invest that high draft pick in another wide receiver or tight end, clearly they think they've got the guys. And maybe they'll prove to be right. I mean, it's still early in all of their careers. We'll see. As long as Josh Allen is comfortable with them, I guess that's all that matters. But, you put the kind of money into the quarterback position that they did, you get that kind of quarterback, you don't want to waste it. You don't want to look back in 5 years and say, man, if we had only gotten that number one receiver or that really elite tight end. Don't waste those chances. You got the quarterback. Get him the weapons. Put everything you can around him because Josh Allen is the guy that's going to win a Super Bowl for them. You just got to get the right surrounding cast for him to do it.
Yeah, we just got to make sure Brandon Beane doesn't go full Packers. Like, it's fine it's fine to do this once or twice. But yeah, like I said, by the time Josh Allen is 30, 31, let's maybe try to inject some young talent into that receiver core. I want to wrap this up talking about, I just think one of the most tough luck players in the NFL right now, and that would be Bears running back DeAndre Swift, who is a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher. Did it with the Eagles. He was just shy of 1,000 yards for the Bears last year. He's got to be so excited. Ben Johnson shows up in Chicago. You know what he did for Detroit's run game. They revamp their offensive line. They acquire all these good players on the interior that's going to make his life easier. And then just everybody wants somebody else to be the running back of the Chicago Bears, it seems like, because that's something you wrote about. And you're not alone, by the way. I mean, the entire NFL world was projecting Ashton Genty to be a Chicago Bear. And look, I'm not trying to convince anybody that DeAndre Swift is the best back in the league, but I feel for the guy a little bit because I'm sure he's dying for an opportunity to run behind an improved offensive line.
Yeah, and I think behind the right offensive line, he could get you 1,000 yards or so. I think he's shifty enough, and we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles that he can be a good player. He's not a great running back by any means, but he's good. I think he's got to be part of the 1-2 punch, though, and it's the two part that's missing for me in Chicago. It's not necessarily that I want somebody to replace Swift. I want somebody to run with him, and I think Ben Johnson does too. When you look at what he had up in Detroit with that great 1-2 punch of Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, I would think he wants to replicate that, which is why I thought he'd go get Genty in the draft, and he'd have Genty and Swift and see what happens, and obviously some more guys for depth behind him. But having DeAndre Swift as my number one guy, I think, yeah, that's fine. I think he could do a decent job, but it's not a running game that really scares anybody. Get a second guy with him, and now you're talking. And I think, from if Ben Johnson wants to run the kind of offense that he ran up in Detroit, I think eventually you're going to have that number two guy to really help him out.
I think that's a really good point. And I got to say, it is surprising when you see a team. And, we talked about the Cowboys at the top of this. It was kind of similar with what happened with the Cowboys and the wide receiver position, where we expected them to take somebody high and it just didn't work out for them to take anybody at all. And it's kind of similar in Chicago. Like, if you need a running back badly enough that we're trying to put Ashton Genty on your team, you would think they'd find a way to spend a big pick on a running back. And they really didn't. I mean, they drafted Kyle Monangai in the 7th round, but that's not what we're talking about. 7th round picks, even at the running back position, you don't have high expectations there. Are you surprised that the Bears settled for that, I guess? Or does that mean that something else could be coming between now and the start of the season?
No, I'm surprised. I really thought they would go find that other guy. Now, there could be something else coming. Maybe, we heard a lot around the draft about Breece Hall being available for the Jets. The Jets don't seem to agree with that assessment, but I certainly could see, if he is available, the Bears wanting to be part of that. Maybe, depending on how things go with the Jets, maybe you get to around the trading deadline and suddenly he's available. The Jets, by the way, have a problem in that they've got a lot of good young players who are going to be coming up for big contracts in future years. So, if they have to deal one of them at some point for some draft picks, I could see them doing something like that. There's not much on the market left. I don't know where J.K. Dobbins' health is, and he could be somebody that could help them at some point. But this may be a future thing that the Bears go out and get that number two guy to complement DeAndre Swift. Maybe they think that for this year they can get by. Maybe he'll get the 1,200 yards, and Ben Johnson thinks he can plug in enough guys, Rashawn Johnson, whoever else, behind him. But I think they can do better than that. I think they want to try to do better than that. And I certainly think that when you get to the trading deadline, every time a running back's name is mentioned, the Bears are going to be a team that we all think is going to be in the mix.
You typically don't think of teams that are competing to win the division as sellers, but I wonder how Atlanta feels about Tyler Algier. And I know he's been a super productive player for them, but the fact of the matter is he's going to be behind Bijan Robinson in the pecking order. That's just the reality of the situation. He's entering the final year of his rookie deal, and he kind of fits what you're talking about. I mean, I guess if we're going to use the cliche, DeAndre Swift is obviously your lightning. Tyler Algier is very much a thunder type of running back. Like I said, Atlanta's pushing to win the division. I don't know if they'd be interested in doing something like that, but if you have a chance to get something for a guy whose contract is coming up, I guess I'm throwing it out there, Ralph. I'm just looking for a solution to the problem.
It makes sense. I mean, he's a former 1,000-yard back. He's never going to be that in Atlanta unless Bijan Robinson gets hurt. So if Bijan Robinson is healthy, if they're competing for the division, it's going to be because of Bijan Robinson, not because of the guy backing him up. So Tyler Algier is a depth player for the Falcons, but he could be much more for the Bears. And if around the trading deadline, the Bears say, "Hey, we'll make it worth your while to send us," I think they certainly would entertain that. I don't think the Falcons, while they are competing for the division, I don't think anybody thinks of them as a Super Bowl contender. So if they can get something, I don't know, a second day pick or something like that for a guy who is not going to be on the team the following year, it might be worth it to them, especially if they are able to develop any kind of depth behind him.
I'm also deeply invested in what happens to Nick Chubb from here because I'm just guessing from the workout videos this guy is posting that he is ready to play in 2025. He's about to turn 30, which is typically scary for NFL teams with running backs, but we know how amazing he is when he's healthy, and he's got the pedigree that if there's a guy that I trust still has some gas in the tank, even after that very grisly injury he suffered a couple years ago, I'm fine making like a low stakes bet on Nick Chubb. I don't know if it's the Bears that pick him up. I don't know if Cleveland's interested in bringing him back, but I hope we get to see him get a real shot to do something with somebody this summer.
I do too. When he was healthy, he looked like he was just starting to have his career take off. And obviously, that was a really gruesome injury. I do question whether he'll ever be the same. It looked like one of those injuries that you never fully recover from and, always have to battle, especially at that position, especially at the age that he's at now. But, look, if you're the Bears and, you get good reports on him and you still need that running back, why not take a chance? He's not going to cost you $20 million. He's going to cost you, around the minimum in incentives. So give him a shot. See if he can come in and, get a light workload and maybe be ready for a little bit more late in the season. I think that would be a terrific chance for them. Again, it depends on, how much of those workout videos are real and he's really that healthy and really ready to go. But, he might, if he's really ready to go, he's by far the best available right now. All it would cost is some money and incentives. So why not?
I pride myself on being hard to impress with off-season workout videos, but I have fallen hook, line, and sinker for. I mean, when Nick Chubb is doing 4.5 foot tall hurdles across the gym and then cleaning 400 pounds like it's nothing, I'm down to take a chance. Yeah, it's 2 million and some per game incentives. I'm on board. The fun part about this is, like we were saying with Clowney, this is all going to stretch into July and August, and teams aren't in a rush right now because they want to get a look at who they just drafted, and vets aren't in a rush either because vets don't want to do off-season practices. So this will be a fun thing to keep our eye on as we get closer to training camp, or even really once training camp starts. And then once teams have to face the reality that not all their draft picks are going to be amazing players right away, that's when we can start to have some fun with what's left of the veteran market.
Yeah. And, the reality could come in a lot of forms. Obviously, training camp opens. They realize we haven't filled the hole in our roster, but also remember, guys get hurt. All of a sudden in training camp, somebody else that we're not talking about loses a running back, and suddenly Nick Chubb has a market. Preseason games, there's always a lot of injuries. So things can certainly change pretty quickly. And yeah, if you're a veteran player that's not signed yet, what's the rush? Wait to find out what your options really are. Obviously, skip those off-season workouts, skip those mini camps. A lot of them want to skip preseason games as well. So, it could be certainly late July before there's any resolution to a lot of this, but it might go right to the beginning of September. It might just be some of these veterans say, hey, I'll sign when it gets a little close to the start of the season.
And just as important, it gives Ralph and I something to talk about in the dog days of summer when some of this inevitably gets resolved. Until then, make sure go check out Ralph's work on foxsports.com and the Fox Sports app. He broke it down for all 32 teams in the league, so your team is in there. And Ralph, we will catch up with you real soon, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dave. Anytime.
All right, that does it for us. Thanks again to Ralph Vacchiano for hopping on. Thank y'all to tuning in, and make sure you come back Thursday as we have a schedule episode breaking down the making of the schedule, the highlights of the schedule, the best Fox games that we're all looking forward to. And look, I know that we already know what all the games technically are, but there's just something so exciting about knowing what it's going to look like, which weeks have the best matchups, who's got the toughest holiday slate. I get excited for it every year. Every year I try to tell myself, we already know all this is happening, and it does not matter. It's one of my favorite things of the year. Make sure you come check it out. Subscribe if you're not. Go find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube, wherever you prefer to get your podcasts, wherever you get your NFL news. You can find us there. Next time I talk to y'all, we will have the 2025 NFL schedule. Clearly, I am looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Until then, I appreciate it as always. I will talk to y'all real soon.